Hello, little helpers. Today's topic is a hot one. It is something that has been requested multiple times. It is something that I've wanted to do because this topic drives me crazy. It is relationship OCD, otherwise known as ROCD, which is how we'll probably be referring to it for the rest of the podcast episode. This is a term that I think has taken on kind of a colloquial meaning, or it's been talked about a lot in pop psychology. Not a ton of research, so we're going to discuss what we do and don't know about this. And, is this OCD? If you are somebody who presents this way, do you really have a type of OCD? Is this more like anxiety, or is it more like reasonable doubts about a relationship? So, Kibby, by getting us started, what is relationship OCD?
Yeah, so what I've read so far is relationship OCD. There's actually two subtypes, but it basically is having obsessive thoughts, like obsessive intrusive thoughts about your partner or about your relationship. So the two subtypes are relationship centered, which means that you have obsessive thoughts about the suitability of your relationship, like how you feel about it, whether you want to commit, how right is this relationship, or your partner's feelings about you and the partner's feeling about the relationship. So that's the relationship-centered subtype. And there's the other one that's the partner-centered. So if you have obsessive thoughts about your partner's deficits, like his flaws, his attractiveness, or hers, I'm sorry, intelligence, morality, fitness to you, that would be partner-centered OCD. So these are, I'm saying thoughts, so we'll say obsessive thoughts a lot, but it could also come up as images or urges to leave the relationship, right? And really importantly, I'm sure we'll talk a lot about this, but these thoughts are ego dystonic, which means it's against your will or values or the situation. So it doesn't really fit. It doesn't really make sense in your life and who you are.
Yeah, I think that part is what is very confusing to me, because that is something I would definitely look at or look for when examining OCD. With something like this, it's so hard to tell. I mean, okay, part of my motivation for doing this episode and looking into it is more is to see if I have ROCD. And I know we in the car were like, I don't know, that sounds like anxiety, or that sounds like reasonable concerns. But a big part of me, I mean, in every relationship really that I've been in that has had a chance of actually working, I just get hit with this wrecking ball of like constantly thinking about, are my feelings good enough? Are they right? Is he really the one? Do I feel strongly enough? Is he attractive enough? What about this one physical flaw? Is that going to drive me crazy until the end of time? What do other people think? Mm-hmm. Will they find him attractive enough for me? What will they judge me for being with him? Like, what if, oh my God, in this moment, I don't feel in love. Oh my God, Have I lost the love completely? Like, all of these thoughts just flooding. And that's really why I went on Lexapro. I mean, mm-hmm. I wanted my mind to shut the fuck up because it was so frustrating. Yeah. But it's so hard to tell, is this ego dystonic or is this my gut?
Yeah, I mean, this is hard to tell because in your relationship, or really any relationship, doubts are normal. It's normal to think of these things sometimes, right? I think it's really and especially if you, right now, we're months away from your wedding, so... Mm-hmm. Damn, I mean, ambivalence, cold feet, questioning, this is all just like really normal stuff, right? Yeah. And so it's hard when it's like, oh, it's OCD if it doesn't fit. And if it does fit, it's totally normal insecurities. I think there's also a level of when we try to diagnose anxiety versus OCD, mm-hmm. both people who would have those disorders like have an obsessive quality, like they're fixated on a problem. They think about it a lot. They ruminate. They ask their friends. They get reassurance. Right? There's just a lot of like mulling it in someone's head. Yeah. But I think OCD has this really particular style. It's really this like looping thought. Right? That's how, when I try to diagnose someone with anxiety versus OCD, it's like, tell me what those thoughts are like. If it's like, I think about it a lot. I think about how attractive he is, and I picture them and blah, blah, blah. If it sounds like it goes all over the place, or at least it like kind of goes over one problem over and over versus like one thought or image. Like if you keep thinking about the one flaw, almost kind of like a record skip, right? Or for people who are as old as we are, like when your CD skips over that one part, that's kind of a more OCD where there's like this one, even sometimes people describe as like one word, like he's not good enough, he's not good enough, he's not good enough, I can't be in this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, right? Like it's almost like a broken record. That feels a little bit more OCD flair, but both will have kind of like that worry and distress and rumination over it too.
Yeah.
So what do you think for you? Yeah.
I don't know.
What does it look like?
I never would think that OCD fits me at all. I'm not, I don't have the personality type usually associated with OCD or those qualities. Like I don't have it in any other arena. But it
do you have one thought that loops in your head, or do you or is it more just like you obsess over one? Yeah,
But no, I would say it was a bunch of different things. Let's not go with my current partner. With past partners, it would just be like, are my feelings right enough? Do I feel the right way? Am I feeling how I'm supposed to feel? I don't. But and then in conjunction with that, it would be, I have doubts and anxieties, and so therefore that means he's not the one, right? But what if this is how it always is, or what if this is just how it is for me? Maybe I'm incapable. And that would usually propel me out of relationships pretty quickly. And it's also a reason why I would date men who were kind of impossible to be with, like men in Hawaii or much older or something like that, because that obstacle almost distracted me from those thoughts. And it is apparently true that people with ROCD tend to have it worse in actually viable relationships. So yeah, it would be quieter in less viable relationships. Yeah.
Well, I mean, just for sake of argument, that sounds like ROCD. Did you have the other part of ROCD and OCD in general is the compulsions, right? So with in our last episode on OCD, we talked about people have these thoughts. They're really distressing because often they are really not in line with anything that they like characterize themselves with, identify with, right? Like, if I don't turn off the stove, my mother will die, right? Like these kind of like really distressing thoughts over and over again. And so people get really upset. Yeah. And they do things to try to get rid of the distress, right? Like that person will check the stove about 8 times. So for ROCD, it's, you might, there's the different kinds of compulsive behaviors. There's like monitoring your own feelings. There's comparing your partner with other partners, or there's sometimes maybe like repetitive neutralizing behavior, like visualizing yourself being happy or in a relationship, or like reassurance seeking, like constantly asking like, is he good enough? Is he good enough? Is he good enough? Do you feel like you have any of those? Or like Googling things? That's another compulsive behavior.
I find this really difficult, and I think this is a difficulty in general with a lot of subtypes of OCD, is when the compulsion is mental, it can be really difficult to understand as a compulsion. So I don't know. I mean, I would certainly compare with other partners. The frustrating part is that then when you read about like avoidant attachment, you see that come in there too. Yeah. A lot of comparison to ex-partners. I've always been really obsessed with money and my partner's money, and so probably Googling things like, how much money can this given career make or something like that. But that feels more like an anxiety response, and it's not like I would do that every day, right?
Right. I was about to say, do you do it over and over again, or is it because a lot of OCD is like diagnosing it, as you know, is like, does it get in the way of your life? Like with people with OCD, they're checking the stove or washing their hands several times a day to the point where they're not like they're late to work all the time, or their hands get chapped. Like, do you feel like any of your Googling or checking or anything like that, or even like, what are your mental checks like, and how long do they take?
I don't know. This is the part where I would probably like fail the clinical significance test, and I also think this is where like ROCD is maybe being used more colloquially than like clinically to mean real OCD. Probably a lot of checking my feelings, but it's not like that. It didn't feel intentional. I would just be constantly aware of like, am I feeling the right way in this moment or in general? And I don't know if that makes it not a compulsion. But yeah, and I would say a lot of reassurance seeking from other people. Like, do you think he's good enough? Do you think he's good looking? Do you think X, Y, and Z? And again, I don't want to make this about my current partner. Like, I've done this with past partners all the time. I would say my current partner is the only one I've beat it with. Yeah.
Do you feel like when you've, check your feelings all the time, do you feel like that gets in the way of you actually being in the moment, or it gets in the way of you actually... I've read descriptions of people who have all of these compulsive behaviors or distress where they just like really stay away from their partner. Like they avoid spending time with them. They avoid kissing them because that brings up the thoughts. Do you feel like that's something you did, or like the avoidance piece,
Yeah. I'm very touchy-feely, affectionate, passionate in the honeymoon period. But my honeymoon periods do not last very long because this hits me very quickly. And once this hits, and there have been so many relationships where I'm like, oh no, it just hit. And it's never going to be the same from this point on. And then I become less affectionate, less, like more avoidant. But it's just it's so confounded by how I was raised and... I tend to be almost less affectionate with close friends than with acquaintances. So that's in multiple areas of my life. And I'm not sure what's explaining it completely, but...
It sounds like you have a little flare of it. Maybe not a full force disorder, but it might be a little flare. The one thing I did read is people who tend to develop ROCD. One thing is people who... I think it's really... people who have these extreme thoughts about relationships, and they have these really, big catastrophic thoughts. For example, people who have the belief that, if they have doubts, if they have these thoughts, that's going to be a disaster, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people could have these thoughts and just be like, that's just... I don't know. That's just, I have doubts sometimes. But people who think, oh no, if I feel this, that means I'm not really in love. Or that means I'm going to end up in a horrible marriage and be miserable forever, right? Like all these like cognitive appraisals or like interpretations about these thoughts, that adds a layer of distress. Do you think that you have that?
I have one, which is I'm incapable of being in love.
Yeah, well...
If I have these doubts, oh my God, they came up again. This always destroys my relationships. It means I'm not really in love. And therefore, since this keeps happening, this is always going to happen. And honestly, I think part of overcoming this was accepting that, like, I probably am not capable of being long-term in love in the way that I thought being in love was supposed to feel like. So I think another part of this is that so many people develop this probably in response to like cultural or media messages about what love is supposed to feel like.
Yeah.
And they just can't maintain that because we're not supposed to, like, our hormones shift over the course of a relationship in such a way that it just can't maintain that kind of honeymoon type love. And I really had to grieve that. Just be like, this was something that I looked forward to my entire life, is just feeling like I'm on cloud 9 all the time and just passionate all the time. And it's not how it is. And maybe I'm also less like that than even some other people. And I had to just be like, okay, I'm going to let that go because I don't want this to stand in the way of me living my life and being with the person I love.
Yeah, our culture doesn't do us favors, right? As you were saying, like all of our rom-coms just end in the moment of pure infatuation, ecstasy that's like requited. They kiss and then the movie ends, right? And there's also this belief that we have that you find the right person. You just magically... the person is there and they're right. And that never really happens. People could be right for different times of your life. or you have a lot of really good things in your relationship and you work on the stuff that's hard, and it's all about like whether you're willing or able to work on that stuff, which will determine like, and also it's like you get married, and as you know, my experience, like divorce, and like, was that the right person? Is the right person the person you're with for the rest of time until you die? What does that mean? Like, what if you get married to someone who would just be a fantastic parent, and then you will see what happens, 50 and beyond, right?
Well, it is an absurd proposition that we are supposed to take a year to 3 years to figure out who is going to be the exact right match for us when we are 50 or 80 years old, when we will be radically different people ourselves. Mm-hmm. So, but yet we still buy into it. And there are so many, I mean, every time I'm fascinated by proposal announcements or engagement announcements, because it's usually the story of like, you are my soulmate, my best friend. I 100% know it's you. Like, I've just never been so thrilled in my entire life. Our relationship is magic. All this stuff. And I'm like, really? Like, I don't know if I believe you. I mean, I think it's more about like, I love this person and I'm gonna do it with them,
Yeah. I'm a sucker for those because I think that we tend to really talk about like, whenever we gab to our girlfriends or something, when we chat, it's usually like a complaint, like, venting session. And I feel like proposals or, even at the wedding, we exchange vows or something. That's like one of the few times that people stand up in front of everybody and say what they love about the relationship. But either way, you're just getting like a one-sided thing, right? In both of those settings, when you do the proposal post, it's not like, man, he really pisses me off when he does this, this, and this. But, I just love that he really thinks about me in the morning when he makes me coffee, right? Like, the blend of like a realistic relationship and love is really not seen in our society as much.
It's funny because my brother got married this past weekend, yesterday, actually. And in their vows, so his wife, Katie, was like, I love how you take care of our fur babies. Like, you're such a great dad to them. You light up. I know you're going to be the most amazing father. But the day before, 48 hours before that, she was telling me, like, I have to beg him to clean the litter box. He always wants me to take the dog out. I'm scared if we have a baby, And she's not saying this with like real fear in her heart, but she's just like, if we have a baby, Andrew's going to have to change his ways.
Right.
So it's just, it's pretty funny. I was like, okay.
Yeah, we just don't. Yeah, right. We save the good and the bad for different contexts, right? It just doesn't mix. But I mean, that what's interesting about ROCD is that people who tend to have it, one thing that makes them vulnerable to it is, really having their self-worth or identity be tied up in relationships, right? It's like, as you can imagine, that's what would make people really freak out over thoughts of doubts. Someone who goes, if it's really important that I have a perfect partner, and if I don't, I'm going to be miserable for the rest of my life, or ties, a bit of their self-esteem. Like, if I have a bad partner, it will look badly on me, right? So people with ROCD seems to, again, not a lot of research, but the, little I saw, it is people who are really focused on relationships, and put a lot of emphasis on it and have like these kind of really catastrophic thoughts about like even just not feeling super excited or just finding something that they don't like about that person, which I have to say, like, really common.
Another from that paper we were reading, other kind of qualities that often play into this are people who are very afraid of being alone, which is interesting, so that it does not describe me at all. Although now I kind of am afraid of that, but I was single pretty much my whole life until Paul. But people who are very afraid of being alone, so they're living on this sort of precipice between these two voids of like being in a relationship is terrifying and not being in a relationship is terrifying. And that is just an awful space to be in.
Yeah.
I certainly, felt that way before, where yeah, I just felt like I was so stuck because I couldn't fully invest in the relationship because I had all these doubts and all of this just noise in my head. And I couldn't leave the relationship. So I was just sort of sitting in like this limbo state, which everybody hates limbo, you know, I mean, just, and I kind of finally had to realize, like, with Paul, you know, I'm not exactly in limbo. I am in this relationship. So what if I decided to move towards that direction and actually invest? And would that change things? And yeah, I just kind of decided, like, I don't want to listen to this anymore unless it's saying something legitimate. So I think that's one of the core questions you have to answer for yourself, or like, what kinds of questions are you asking yourself? Are you asking yourself, do I feel the exact right way? Am I 100% completely attracted to my partner? Do my doubts mean that this is doomed? Or are you asking yourself questions like, do our values really align? Can I see this person as a parent? How do we handle conflict? You know, more kind of problem solving or objective. No, not really objective, but more objective, I guess, than like, is my body state the correct one when I'm with this person? Because when ROCD hits, it doesn't even matter if your relationship is good or bad. Like, it'll bring you down.
Yeah.
Because you're focusing on the bad stuff all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think this is the crux of the difference between like kind of like questioning or insecurity and the ROCD. With ROC, it has a level of like negative beliefs about your own thoughts, right? Like, so you could have these thoughts and really question it and see if it makes sense in your life. Like, be like, yeah, what am I looking for in a partner? Does he fit it or she fits it? If yes, then these thoughts are kind of just mental things, right? And then also like the avoidance piece, right? Are you leaning in? Are you being present in the relationship? Are all these thoughts just taking you out of the relationship? And really, there's no way then if you're constantly avoiding, there's no way to actually figure out if this is the right person or not. You're just going to destroy the relationship.
Exactly.
It's the same. Actually, I see that sometimes with people who have like health anxieties, where they have these looping thoughts about, do I have a disease? Or I felt a lump. Do I have a disease? Do I have a disease? But they don't go to the doctor, right? And so they're avoiding going to the doctor. So it's just like, sometimes our anxieties or, the obsessive compulsive thoughts like lead to avoidance that actually take you away from the behaviors you need to do in order to like fix the problem.
First of all, I loved how you were talking about hypochondriacs, and then you said, do I have a lump? And as you did that, you put your hand on your throat. It's almost like you were thinking of my fiance or something when you said that.
That's right. The subconscious.
Paul has a polyp in his throat and was convinced he had cancer for a week or two, and has also apparently had ALS during our relationship and another form of cancer. So yeah, it's fun times.
Yeah, and another questions you could ask yourself if you're trying to figure out if you have ROCD or just like normal doubts. It's really interesting to think that this is a disorder that's also called body dysmorphia by proxy. I was surprised to hear that. It's kind of the same thing. Body dysmorphia is this obsessive thoughts about a flaw of yours. Like, I've heard it sound like, oh, I'm obsessed with the fact that I think my nose is too big, and I just constantly look at the mirror for several hours a day. I want to look at pictures of myself and just over and over and over again look at my nose and do things to try to minimize my nose, right? Of course, it's normal, totally normal to have insecurities, parts of you that you don't like. Maybe you even think about it a lot, especially if you're in different times in your life, right? Adolescents sound like they're all body dysmorphic. But does it take over your life? Like, does it look like it's just really consuming you, especially all the compulsive behaviors? Are you looking in the mirror a whole bunch, right? Same with your relationship. Are you looking at and comparing your partner all day to the point where you're not even there enjoying that partnership, right? So, I mean, I think that term kind of helped me really think about it in ways that I can understand. That
would only capture, though, the one sort of subset of ROCD types who are focused solely on physical stuff, though.
Yeah, I guess it's the same idea. It's like this fixation on a flaw, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not just like, oh, what is right for me? What is love? It's just like, uh-oh, this is wrong. Uh-oh, this is wrong. And I know, it actually is funny because it seems like your obsessive thoughts are way more about your own feelings about intimacy than really any of these people. Because I know that it's something big for you where you're constantly checking like how you're expressing and feeling love and worrying if there's something wrong or if you're unable to love, right? I know I always yell at you about this if you have these catastrophic thoughts about your own ability to love, which makes no sense to me based on what I know about you. So
Yeah, but I'm realizing that actually maybe the criticizing the partner is kind of part of the compulsion, which I think it might be like, oh God, oh no, I'm having doubts. I don't feel this way. Okay. Now I need to see if those doubts are real or if I can overcome them. Okay, so now I'm going to focus on all the bad things about him to sort of see if like my love can handle it.
Oh, I see.
Can I handle, again, not my current partner, can I handle his head shape? Can I handle his voice? Can I, like, will this drive me crazy? And of course, the more you focus on it, the more it drives you crazy.
Yeah, what would that look like? Like if I were to watch you in your relationship back then, what would you do things differently once you had those thoughts?
I would just notice them constantly. And I will say, Paul's always getting on me about being too critical. And I am hyper aware of how he and every other person I've ever dated like interacts with other people. Because a lot of it is like, oh, what are other people going to think about me? Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, there's a couple different things going on. It's like, am I capable of love? Do I feel the correct way? And then it's like, how will other people perceive me in this relationship? This person is like, I mean, your partner is a bit of an ambassador for you as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm fairly controlled about my image in certain ways. I don't know if people would automatically guess that.
I mean, you were on The Bachelor, so I would say that relationships are a big part of your image, right?
Yeah.
And there might be one other feature about ROCD or people who are at risk for it is kind of like these placing importance on thoughts. This is very common in OCD. It's almost kind of like a magical thinking thing that we talked about, which is like, if I think I didn't turn off the stove and then I'm going to kill my family, right? That's, that's an example of an OCD thought. Sometimes when people have these thoughts, then they go, oh no, because I had this thought, I'm going to make things happen, right? They almost have this like magical power to their thoughts that instead of thinking, oh, thoughts are thoughts, they come in and out and I have the weird thoughts all the time. It's like, oh, now that I have the thought, disaster will happen. And I kind of heard that when you were talking about, when you're in a relationship, you get into it and then you start to have those thoughts. You're like, it's all over from there. It's like from there on out. So that might be a thing for you.
Absolutely. I think the challenge with ROCD, and again, I think this is something that Western culture has turned into a problem, is that I think our culture places so much emphasis on how you feel in your relationship versus how you function in your relationship. And so ROCD comes in because you're like, well, I don't feel the right way, or do I feel the right way? Like, it can almost feel like the way you feel in your relationship is the entire point. And so as soon as doubt creeps in, then you're screwed. Versus in other cultures, it's like, no, how do we function in this relationship? Are we people who can get along, solve problems, take care of kids, like move through life gracefully? And so that was another big shift I tried to go through, was like moving away from the do I feel perfectly to do I function well? Does this relationship serve like higher purpose and value for me?
Yeah. It's way different than, let's say, my Chinese grandparents who made it up to their 90s. My grandma was 99. They had a very long marriage. And there were some times in the marriage when they hated each other so much they didn't speak for like weeks, or I think like months. they just passed messages to other people, to each other in the same house. And if they took that seriously, they wouldn't be. I mean, they had, I don't know about a happy marriage. I can't speak for them, but they looked like they made it work, man. And it's natural for feelings to go up and down, but we just don't. Yeah, I think our society does not have a very good tolerance for that. It's like once people have negative feelings, It's all over.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't like feeling bad in this culture.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, so notice that on social media. So yeah, I think that's kind of a tip lies in that problem of like, maybe instead of focusing so much on how you feel, focus on questions like, can this person help me with my goals? Can this person make me a better person? Can I help them be a better person? Do I like, when I envision the way we'll grow together, do I like that picture? Do I appreciate how this person treats me? Does this person, besides the doubts, make me feel safe and cared for? You know, all of these questions that are different from, do I feel in love all the time? Because that's not even a defined term. Like, we haven't operationalized that.
Right. Yeah. Just looking at what the relationship looks like, not just what's going on in your mind, but just like, you know, how are we together? What are my values? Like, taking a step back. And that might be easier said than done. You might need, you know, having a discussion with friends or something like that, or a therapist would be helpful for that. Because I know that when you're in the loop, it's hard to pick apart, right?
Well, there's part of you that is wanting to find the problems. Because you're trying to solve this big question of like, am I going to screw up the entire rest of my life? Or am I going to break this person's heart? Or, sign myself up for a relationship that doesn't work and then waste my time, and then my childbearing years are over, and all of this muck. So, really trying to do a kind of an autopsy of like, does the relationship work well? What are the positive qualities?
Yeah. So like, moving into what do we do about this? You've overcome it. So, you know, we could start with your tips on like how you actually got through this and how you're actually able to, you know, get ready to walk down the aisle in July.
I would say I've 70% overcome it. I mean, I think it does kind of play and hold me back when it comes to intimacy in some ways. But first of all, SSRI worked really well. It just really quieted the noise. And that's what they're meant to do, is kind of quiet the noisy brain. That was really helpful. I think in part, having a partially open dialogue with Paul about this, I never said I have ROCD or I constantly fixate on your flaws or the way that I'm feeling. And I wouldn't say that I was necessarily constantly fixating on his flaws. It was much more about like, whether I was feeling the right way. I was also in a really difficult place of having moved from New York. My identity was changing. And so being somewhat open, and I say somewhat because there's really no use in being like, you know, I don't like X, Y, Z things about you. These drive me crazy. Every single day I'm on the brink of, should I break up? Because it's not even necessarily true. I think that's the ego dystonic part, is like, I wasn't actually on the brink of breaking up at any point until we did, and that was for a very legitimate reason. But just basically being like, I have anxiety about the relationship. I have a lot of anxiety about commitment. I have a lot of guilt that my anxiety is going to hurt you or is wasting your time. I don't always know what to do with this, and sometimes it makes me pull away. You know, I think being kind of broad strokes about that can alleviate some of the fear, because I think the guilt is one of the nastiest parts of this whole thing. Feeling like, oh my God, I'm with this person, I love them, but my thoughts keep going in this direction. What if I'm wasting their time? What if I'm a bad partner? What if I'm making them live their lives with somebody who doesn't truly love them or respect them? All of that, you know, plays in. And it's very difficult. And I've seen that clinically as well. Like, I've had ROCD in patients, and the guilt is the worst part.
A big thing in OCD, as we talked about in our guilt episode too.
yeah, guilt, huge. I think mindfulness, one thing I kind of directed a patient to do was, like, a lot of times this can come up during intimacy. Okay, we're having sex. Do I feel the right way? Am I turned on enough? Am I passionate enough? And it's like, okay, next time you are holding each other or having sex or kissing or whatever, just focus on the physical sensations. You know, zero in, take 30 seconds to just focus on the rush of oxytocin. You know, how his fingers feel on your arm, whatever you need to do, just really focus on the actual present moment and not your thoughts, and see what happens. And I find that can be helpful. But mostly I when I talk about mindfulness, I often think about the principles of mindfulness, just non-judgmental, present-focused awareness.
Yeah.
So when these thoughts come in, I'm just kind of like, yeah, I've had that thought before. It can go away. Like, yeah, I see it. I don't need to engage with it. I'm just going to focus on like moving one foot after the other and building.
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of outcome that I would hope from someone who went through treatment for OCD or ROCD, you know, the kind of changing your relationship with your thoughts, right? Not be like, oh, I've decided he's the one, but to change your relationship, how you approach your own thoughts, and one of much more acceptance and ease than, you know, panic and pushing it away and suppression and things like that. Yeah. And being in the moment and engaging with situations that you normally would avoid.
Yeah, exactly. Because you were saying earlier, like, this is sure to bring you out of the relationship and just make you kind of this, like, you're there physically, but your mind is just, you know, somewhere totally else, and you just can't enjoy the time you have with each other, which then enhances the problem. I think also letting go of ideas that I had held on to that were making me suffer, like finding the one or forever. And instead it's like, I'm going to act as if this is forever, and I'm going to make those commitments and treat this that way. But I don't actually know. Neither does any other person who gets married. Unless you live in a culture with no divorce. But And I said, you know, like, shit, if by chance the one is this thing that's out there and everything just aligns in your life and your mind and all of your feelings are suddenly correct and 100% there, then maybe that'll happen. But right now, I'm going to act as if I'm going to prioritize this relationship because I don't really believe in that thing anyway. And I really value what I have with this person. Yeah. Yeah. You're never
sounds
trapped.
Like you basically treated yourself. Yeah. I had some experience doing CBT for OCD, and so I could talk through the interventions that I would use, you know, based on my experience. I've never treated ROCD. I would love to. Sounds so interesting, but basically to get to where you are, this is what I would do as a therapist. This kind of goes along with what I know from exposure and response prevention, which is the best therapy for OCD. And it's crazy. I really love that therapy. It works so quickly and so well. It blows people's mind. People can go from like washing their hands for hours a day to like living their life. It's so incredible. So the way it starts out is really getting a full understanding of the person's history. And also, getting the big scope, like, how are you with relationships? What are your values? What do you want? Have you had this in other relationships before? Right? Just kind of getting a picture of like how this fits into that person's like values and relationship history. And if they have OCD in other contexts, because OCD and ROCD are actually related. So people who tend to have one tend to have the other. And then, you know, you kind of would go into a really in-depth monitoring of when these symptoms come up. Okay, and what situations do you have these thoughts? Is it after you kiss them? Is it when you hang out with your friends with them? Like, what situations trigger these thoughts? And then what are the thoughts? Is it a looping thought? Is it a picture? Is it an urge? And then what do you do once to deal with the distress from it? Do you Google over and over about relationships? Do you ask your friends? Do you compare, right? All the different compulsions. So doing that kind of assessment, and then the two pieces, working on, I think the main thing is exposure. So the way we would do it in regular OCD is really just like the idea is that you are having probably all of these negative thoughts about these thoughts, as we said, like, oh, if I have these thoughts, it's bad to have doubts. If I have a negative feeling, it means it isn't true love. Blah, 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 right? Like kind of these worries, and you're trying to push the thoughts away, probably. So it's really like exposure to the thoughts is to say to yourself out loud over and over again, he's not right for me. He's not right for me. He's not right. Like actually like leaning in and saying the thoughts or really picturing whatever their thoughts are. It's weird. It's like, it's this kind of like Chinese finger trap. The more you try to push those thoughts away, the more they come. So weirdly enough, you know, when you introduce the intervention, they're like, I have these thoughts all the time and it freaks me out. It's like, we're just going to sit and just have those thoughts. They're like, no, no, no. But actually, once you just lean into saying those thoughts out loud or picturing them with a therapist, it kind of takes the power out of them, right? It just is like, oh, I can have these thoughts and just go on with my day, right? Yeah. It kind of gives agency over it.
I will say one thing along those lines that helped me was over time in a long-term relationship, which I had never had before. Yeah, I had noticed that like sometimes I go through periods of time where I feel very strongly about him. And then other times I'm like more annoyed or just like less connected, less passionate. Right now I happen to be in a good, like gooier, mushier, like, yay, we love each other phase. But a month ago we were not. And I would just sometimes say like, I don't like him today.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I don't like him.
Right.
But I will tomorrow, you know?
Exactly. Just like leaning into saying it, right? And for people who really have high distress over it and avoid it, saying it over and over. That's what exposure is like saying it until it doesn't feel scary anymore, right? Yeah. So then you have that, but then another huge piece is to block the compensatory, like compulsions, right? So if you're the kind of person who thinks, is he the right one? And then you tend to Google or you tend to check your feelings, you know, if you're feeling right, it's like trying to not do that. That's harder with mental ones. Yeah. It's easier to be like, you're not going to Google. You're just going to, you know, it's actually what your tip is. Sit with the mindfulness. You're going to sit and notice your feelings, let them happen. Don't go into all your mental rituals to try to get the thoughts away. Just be distressed. Just sit there and be distressed over and over. So that's like the main part. And I think that there's also these other parts that are really legitimate that are like people who thinks, well, if I marry someone who's wrong for me, this is going to be a disaster, right? I'll be miserable. Those kind of extreme thoughts. And we would kind of deal with that like any other anxiety thought. It's like, okay, let's say that's true. Yeah. Let's expose ourselves to that reality. What if you marry this person and they're the wrong person? How would you cope with that? How would you cope with that in a way that would work for you? Like, what would you do? Would you leave them? Would you develop other parts of your identity? Would you go to couples therapy? Like, what would you do? Right? So you kind of lean into those, like that worst case scenario there to try to, you know, really plan effectively for it. So that's really, I would just do those things to get to where you are, which is like being able to lean in and say, yeah, I'm going to have these thoughts once in a while and I'll say it out loud and I'll still engage and not avoid. Right? Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if one thing that happens, because I know I do this, is when these thoughts happen, you start resenting your partner for making you feel bad or feel guilty. Like, oh, if he just would only stop doing this one behavior, then I could stop torturing myself. And there's kind of a realization of like, it's not his job to make you attracted to him 100% of the time. If there are repeating things that you really don't appreciate, then that's one thing. But so yeah, another exposure I'll sometimes do, because oh my God, I've always like hated introducing the guy I was dating to my friends, because I get really, it's just like, I'm really bad at this one, but just like letting him socialize without my commentary or critique. Like, he has lots of friends, people love him, I don't need to, you know, be putting my sort of tentacles all over his interactions. Maybe I'll get there someday,
I guess. But all the things that you've been saying, you know, are legitimate. And, you know, for like, there's like, he's not perfect, you're not perfect, relationships are not perfect. This is across the board. So I think it is tricky. As I was thinking about this episode, I was like, I just don't want to invalidate anyone's worries, right? Like, if anyone has these doubts, and I'm telling you to find a way to just move past them and ignore them and think that they're okay. and there's like legit problems. Like, it's tricky. It's tricky to kind of assess the reality of this. And I think, this step one is like to really look at your values, your life, and to see if this person fits in. And that's a bigger question, right? But I don't want, as we're saying this, I'm like, and you're saying, well, I worry about how he is in social environments. It's like, yeah, you're gonna, and that's normal, and that's fine.
Yeah, I guess so. First of all, sometimes you lose interest in a person and you can't get it back. Paul is the first, I never lost interest in Paul, but Paul's the first person that when this came, my feelings stayed. Like they returned, and I can go through kind of waves with him, which is immensely relieving to me. With other people, I was just like, yeah, not worth it. I'm gonna end this. I also think if you don't feel safe in your relationship, if you feel insulted, belittled, please listen to those feelings.
Yeah, I mean, I'm saying this as like a person who went through this myself. I would have obsessive thoughts about, problems with my husband or things that I don't like about him. Like every day they'd come up every morning and I'd think about it and I'd do things to push it away. And then look where I'm, like I wish I listened to them. Right. Yeah. And I don't think I had ROCD. I think I just had legitimate concerns because if I really, even back then when I looked at the things that I valued and I cared about, the relationship dynamic did not line up for it. And I was just trying to push away my concerns to make it work. So I might have done the opposite, So, I think this is all a really, really complex, interesting thing to dig in. I don't think it's hard to be like, are your concerns real?
And now we're back at the beginning.
Exactly. So
this is why ROCD drives people fucking crazy. Because they're like, is it gut instinct or is it this process that is just sabotaging everything? Yeah. Well, I hope we've been able to help at least a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, there's some resources out there. So if you really don't know if this applies to you, there's a book. I haven't read it yet, but it seems to be really good and really popular. It's called Relationship OCD, a CBT-based guide to move beyond obsessive doubt, anxiety, and fear of commitment in romantic relationships. Ooh. There is, we're trying to find a good scale, like a self-report scale to put up on the website. We found one. I don't know how strong it is in the research, but at least like these kind of scales can help you, start to ask yourself these questions.
Yeah, and that one is called the ROCD test. It's by the OCD Center of Los Angeles. It's very easy to find on Google. We'll post it on the website. All right. Well, guys, thank you as always for listening in. Whether or not you have obsessive worries about how much you love our podcast, if you could go ahead and give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts, that would be mucho appreciated. And we'll see you next week. By accessing this podcast, I acknowledge that the hosts of this podcast make no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of the information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only and do not constitute the practice of medical or any other professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The hosts do not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast, and information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement.